Why are men struggling in today's culture? We see this all across the board. From young men struggling with anxiety and depression, to middle-aged men dealing with their crisis, all the way to older men living in regret, thinking about the could-haves, should-haves, but didn't. See, the reason is that most of us feel alone. Most of us don't have an outlet. See, if a man is asking for help, he feels that he's weak, because the culture has conditioned men just to be strong, just to toughen things out, just to push through and find the solution at the end of the tunnel. Today, we're going to dig into a conversation with Chris Williamson. He is the host of the podcast, The Modern Wisdom. If you haven't seen his content, make sure you check out his YouTube channel. Make sure you check out his podcast, because he has some great content bringing awareness to the conversation of why men are struggling and what can we do about it. Let's begin.
Another lesson, one of my favorite ones, this was from Richard Reeves, great author, wrote the book of Boys and Men, and came back on the show for the second time this year. We ended up going for 3 hours. He's just such an interesting researcher when it comes to sort of the masculinity question, men's roles, boys' roles in the modern world. He said men aren't seen as having problems, but as being the problem.
The book of Boys and Men talks about the statistics of why young men are struggling and how this is just a global problem, not just a problem here in America. Because more and more men are feeling like it's not worth living. More and more men are dealing with depression. And because we've been conditioned not to ask for help, we're dying silently. This book is going to give you some crazy statistics that's just going to impact not just your life, but it's also going to impact how you see all the young men and the men around you.
Suicide rates among men under 30 have risen by 40% since 2010 and are 4 times higher than among young women. Male suicide accounts for as many deaths as breast cancer. Male suicide accounts for as many deaths as breast cancer.
So I've been working with men for the last decade. And at the beginning, when I started this process, I never thought I was going to take them this deep. I never thought men were such a bad place. I went through my depression. I went to suicidal thoughts. I just thought I was one of the 1% of men who are going through this, because that's the curse of the high achiever. We think that everything is great, but when things are bad, we make it even worse than what it is. So but right now, what I'm seeing is the statistics right here are facts. More men and men are dying, and they have suicidal thoughts, and the numbers just keep increasing. We're more likely to commit suicide than women. Why? Because we always feel that we're not enough. We always feel like we're failing. So now it's time for you to start really thinking about how many times you felt like, man, life is not worth living. Because if you don't catch those thoughts are going to continue to consume you. That's the problem with men right now, that we're not bringing in the light into the darkness. We allow those dark moments, dark thoughts just to consume us, and eventually just eat us alive.
Men are less likely than women to go to college or buy a home. They are more likely to be lonely and are more vulnerable to addiction. Young white men from lower income homes are worse off than their fathers on almost every economic and social indicator. There is a bigger gender gap on campuses today than in 1972, when the government passed Title IX to prevent sex-based discrimination in education. But today, the disparities in college enrollment and performance are the other way round. There is no strong evidence that young men are turning against gender equality, but they have turned away from the left because the left has turned away from them. The problems of young men are not the confections of reactionaries. This is the story of elite neglect, not voter chauvinism. The Democrats have failed to address these issues. Under the Biden administration, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has refused to acknowledge the gender disparity in suicide rates. The White House Gender Policy Council has not tackled a single issue facing primarily boys and men. There have been initiatives to promote women in STEM and construction, but nothing about encouraging men into teaching or mental health. There are women's health research initiatives, but no office on men's health. The Democrats and progressive institutions have a massive blind spot when it comes to male issues, and this was exposed in the election. At worst, men are seen as not having problems, but as being the problem.
So Chris is reading from the author of the book, when he actually breaks down all the statistics, why there are problems, why young men are struggling, and at the same time, how nobody's doing anything about it. How this country is just focusing on different things as opposed to focusing on strengthening men. That there's no signs of light at the end of the tunnel. There's no signs of men getting help. That young men feeling like they have a purpose, that they matter.
Remembering that Richard is the most gentle, researched, sort of lefty policy wonk type guy, DC type person that you could have saying this, and that sounds like a fucking hammer blow that will have been dampened down an awful lot, and the language will have been dialed back. It's not good. And, a lot of the conversations that I've had this year have been around trying to effectively navigate the conversation to do with men and boys. How much do we need to caveat? How much do we need to say, well, it's not to say that women don't have problems, but now that I've gone through this weird laundry list of like a fucking land acknowledgement for sex and gender, I can now talk about the problems that I'm here to face. That doesn't happen in the reverse. If someone's talking about the problems faced by girls and women, that doesn't occur. Well, we must remember that men kill themselves at 5 times the rate that women do, and if men had killed themselves at the rate that women had, we would have 500,000 more men from 1999 to 2020. That doesn't happen. But I guess another insight was I'd had a bunch of conversations about the challenges that men and women face in the modern world, and I realized how rarely pro-male and pro-female activists are prepared to genuinely accept that the other sex may encounter difficulties without measuring it against their own suffering.
See, the challenge that I see right now with people is that we're constantly just picking a side, right? It is a man's problem, it's a woman's problem. No, the moment that men level up and lead, we're going to solve everybody's problems, because the reality is that the crisis that we're going through right now is weak men. That's the whole punchline here. Weak men created this problem. Weak men have been running the show. Weak men are the one who have been in power. Now, no wonder we're raising weak kids. No wonder we're in this situation. Until we talk about this crisis right now, we're never going to find a solution. And it's not to say that women don't have problems. Shit, women have a lot of problems. But at the same time, men have to deal with the shit that they're going through in order for us to help women as well. I tell my wife all the time, like, I'm helping men become better fathers, better husbands, because I know that the moment that I got help, the moment that I started working on myself, I became a better husband, I became a better father. Therefore, also helping my wife, helping my daughter, helping them become better. We're all complementing each other. We're not competing with each other. A whole man and a whole woman, the moment that they become in power, they could become a power couple. By just comparing and thinking, this side or that side, it's not going to get us anywhere. And that's why most men refuse to get help, because they don't want to be judged. They don't want to seem that they're weak. They don't want to seem like, man, I'm less than. Because we're supposed to be strong. We're supposed to have it all together. We're supposed to figure shit out. But what happens when you don't? What happens when you feel like you're in a dark place and there's nowhere to turn to, nowhere to go?
There is an assumption that any attention paid toward men takes it away from women or some other minority group who is more deserving, and vice versa. It's a zero-sum view of empathy. And obviously, this is not how empathy works. Rather, it indicates just how broken the conversation around men and women is, that care for people who are struggling in life is seen as a fucking finite resource. Women can point to how men don't need to fear sexual assault as much, and men can point to how women don't need to fear Me Too allegations, but men hold more CEO positions, but women are graduating college at higher rates, but there's more male homelessness, but there's more women in sex work. It's like both sides are trying to balance some bizarre simultaneous social justice equation. Like, how many false allegations are worth a sexual assault? How many female graduates are worth a male CEO?
That's all the victim mentality. The reason that we're constantly fighting with each other is because we have the victim mentality. It's not about who's doing better, who's doing worse. It's about, can I take ownership of the shit that I'm going through? So one of the main things that I help men do is take ownership. I tell them to repeat this mantra over and over again. I am the problem, but I'm also the solution. Because you could either be a victim of your circumstance or you could be the creator of your destiny. And as a man, we have to get our balls back. The problem is that we've given our balls to everyone. And we lack the balls, we lack the courage to actually figure our shit out. And that's the reason that we have to create groups of men that will empower each other, as opposed to groups of men who feel sorry for each other and they compare each other and they become victims. If you're blaming your wife, if you're blaming somebody else, whoever the government, you are a victim. And that's the problem. The moment that you become weak, you become a victim of your circumstances. The moment that you take ownership and you realize that you are the fucking problem, you also realize that you're also the solution. Because pointing the finger is never going to end well.
The entire conversation is basically saying, my privilege is more oppressed than your privilege. It's like victimhood masquerading as arithmetic. And it's entirely based on a flawed premise, because the complexity of the truth is inconvenient for both sides. There is no equating the suffering of one group to another, and perceiving the discussion in this way causes everyone to enter the framing correctly as adversaries. accepting the challenges of one group does not disable attention from being paid to another. And similarly, it shouldn't be the case that a discussion about men's troubles should first be hedged with fucking groveling caveats about how we know that women face a myriad of problems too, lest the position be seen as myopic misogyny. Zero-sum empathy is one of the most boring and narcissistic things that keeps on happening. And it's done over and over again, and it achieves nothing except for pushing both groups apart from each other.
That's the fastest way of getting nowhere. Thinking that your shit is the only shit that matters. Thinking that your problem is the biggest problem there is, and therefore everybody should pay attention to your problem. The truth is that we have to have empathy. Empathy for other people around us. Empathy for your wife. Empathy for your kids. Empathy for the people around you. At the same time, empathy for yourself. As men, we don't have enough empathy for ourselves. We beat ourselves down so much that we feel like we're not doing enough. We feel like we're not enough. And therefore, at the end, what's the whole point of this? Most of the time, we feel like burning shit to the ground instead of building. So the key here is to have empathy. Empathy for yourself. Empathy for others. And at the same time, realize that it's never as bad as it looks. Whatever situation you're going through right now, there's always a man that has figured his shit out. So you're not alone in this circumstance. You're not alone in this situation. But your job is to take ownership and realize that if you have empathy for yourself, you're going to grow. You're going to get out of this dark place.
And I can't do much for women, but I've got some, I think, pretty reasonable and influential friends that could propel a better conversation around men, and working quite hard to make that happen in whatever way I can. But it's an uphill battle in many ways. Richard taught me this really interesting thing about how when people don't listen to your point, if you've been sort of, campaigning for something for a while, you turn up the volume and the intensity ever more, especially if they say, no, it's not, or they, you don't feel like it's being welcomed, not only not being heard, but is actively being pushed back. And I can definitely see that temptation, that dynamic going on, that gravitational pull for you to become ever more a firebrand when talking about this sort of stuff. And there's definitely days when I feel a bit more fiery than others. And those are the days I try and stay off Twitter.
You have to realize that the moment that you're helping yourself, you're also helping others. And bringing light into the darkness is always going to bring healing. And I love what Chris is saying, that we have to have this type of conversation. We have to bring awareness to the suffering of men, the suffering of young boys, because the only way we're going to be able to heal is by acknowledging that we are the fucking problem. But at the same time, we also could become the solution. So my intention for you as you watch this video is to realize, number one, you're not alone. If you're a man, if you're a boy, if you're a young man, you're dealing with depression, welcome to the club. Doesn't matter how much money you have, doesn't matter how successful you are, we all deal with this shit. But we have to get off the stigma that if we ask for help, we're weak. We have to raise our hands. We have to ask for help. We have to seek mentors, teachers, comrades, people around us that will hold this space for us. But sometimes see that it's never as bad as it looks, because there's always a light at the end of the tunnel. And I believe that God is watching over us and saying, man, I know you're going to figure this shit out. As men, as leaders, it's our responsibility to lead our families, to lead our kids, to lead the community. God ordained in you to become the leader. So if you go into the darkness, just know that you're getting stronger. That no matter how bad shit gets, there's always a light at the end of the tunnel. And some days when you feel like you're overwhelmed and the world's in your shoulders, just know somebody out there is praying for you. And somebody out there is rooting for you. Because I'm rooting for every single man that wants to lead. I'm rooting for every single man that believes in his core, in his being, that he was meant for something bigger. And if you're watching that video, it's just a way of God putting something in you, seeding in you, the fact that your life matters. And if I could help one man remember who the fuck he is, I've done my job. I believe in you. I know that things are never as bad as they look. And just know that the moment that you get stronger, you could help another man find his edge. Because our job is to continue to sharpen our edge and lead with power. Because the best is yet to come. If you like this video, make sure you comment and check out this other video here when I talk about how does motivation work? What is that one thing that triggers motivation in your brain, and how can you control it? Check it out.